We have one person I know from, and that guy does.
No, that's my point.
Yeah, amazing bacon. I mean, stuff I know, a lot of stuff, if I don't know what it is, I buy it. If I know it, then I will buy it. So you have a big commute here, though, then?
My half hour.
It is, really?
No traffic. But I don't need to be at the office here.
Right, I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. I know we're waiting for Olin. He's on his way. Should be here any minute now. But thank you all for coming today. I'm Laurie Boyer, the Executive Director here at Rockville Economic Development. We are pleased to be hosting this event, the Rockville Cyber event for small to medium-sized companies. And we were happy to partner with our partners to pull this together today. Robel Worku and Sarah Miller from Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, Joe Congerti from TEDCO helped us pull this together, and Sean O'Neill from Network Alarm Corporation. And Sean, I just want to point out to everyone that the event had not even officially started, and Sean came up to me and said, I just want everybody to know I'm switching my company banking to M&T Bank as a result of today and talking with the folks from M&T Bank. So thanks to M&T Bank for that. I mean, that's,
Thank you.
Before we even started, look at that. So that's how beneficial this meeting is going to be for everybody here today. So thank you all for coming. We have a lot of great speakers who have a lot of great information they're going to share. So I'm not going to take any more time in talking. So I'm going to turn it over now to actually Bill Day, an attorney with Day Law Practices, and Marcus Roschecker, the Cybersecurity Program Manager for the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security, who are both going to give you a 5-minute overview of things that you should be aware of and in the cyber world as it relates to legal requirements, etc. So I'll turn it over to you guys, and then we'll move on to the panel.
All right, well, my name is Bill Day. I work for the Day Law Practice, and I'm a lawyer. I do plaintiff side employment law, but more importantly for today, I'm also a small businessman since I run my own practice. Now, as a lawyer, I have certain heightened ethical duties when it comes to handling electronic information. Lawyers are all governed by what are known as the rules of professional conduct, and our licenses depend on them. And among the requirements of the rules of professional conduct are duties of competence, communications, confidentiality, and keeping your client's property safe. Now, obviously, if you ever engage a lawyer, you might want to be sure your lawyer is doing all those things. So I'm really the man on the street here among a group of technical experts. And what I wanted to share is in line with these kinds of duties that lawyers need to adhere to. I want to talk a little bit about just how I, as a non-technical expert, navigate some of these requirements. Now, I've often had people say to me, look, why do I have to worry about security? I have nothing to hide. And my answer to that is, well, you have lots to hide. You have social security numbers, credit card information, personal finances, passwords, customer lists, correspondence, all of which you might not want to share with the world. So some of the things I try to do to make sure that I deal with basic security are to keep my own computers secure, to be diligent about my cloud computing, and to make sure that my data is safe. On my own computer, I make sure that I have a password manager. I have a different password for every platform. I have 2 passwords that I need to remember. One is the password to log into my computer. The other is the password to log into my password manager. And my password manager password is about 7 random words. It's probably at least 64 characters long, randomly chosen on a roll of the dice, but since they're words, at least I can remember them. So that's about as secure as I can get and still remember what my password is. And fortunately, the rest of my passwords are pure, random, computer-generated gobbledygook. I try to keep them, if the system will take them, about 64 characters long. I also am very interested in making sure that any platform that I'm using has two-factor authentication. So my practice management software, my QuickBooks, my other online platforms, I'm looking for that. Confidentiality, obviously, an enormous deal for lawyers. And frankly, lawyers are terrible at it. I used to comment that, you know, the last generation of lawyers, a lot of them didn't even know how to type. And you'd be surprised at how many today are at the same level of technological security. The bar, however, is becoming increasingly concerned about the need for security. They are developing a heightened awareness of the need, at least in certain circumstances, for especially confidential information like medical records to encrypt, whether it's encrypting your Adobe files if you send them over the internet, or if you're going to send email, encrypting your email. The biggest problem I find with encrypting my email is the clients won't use it and don't have the capability to use it. When I deal with the government, I sue the Department of Veterans Affairs a lot, so I have to keep their information confidential. I can use their standard method, which is known as an S-MIME encryption key. You can get a free one. I've given you a URL here. PGP, bit complex, free, relatively secure. I've investigated a service called Pertrue. Some drawbacks, but the client doesn't have to do much to implement it. And you can do what a lot of your doctors do as well, which is use a portal. So you get a little email that says, go log into your portal and get your information. And I use that for my billing. So when I bill a client, they get a little notice saying, your bill is ready. They go log into my practice management portal. All their bills are listed there in the portal, and they're not floating around on the internet through the email. I have a laptop. I'm sure many of you have laptops. I'm sure many of you have cell phones. My whole life and my whole practice is on my cell phone. So I make sure that I have a relatively long passcode on my cell phone. Fortunately, I know Apple encrypts their phones. I'm sure you've seen that in the news. I also make sure that my laptop has full disk encryption. I use a Mac, so it's file vault. If you use a PC, it would be BitLocker. You can find the instructions on the internet, but if you're walking around with an unencrypted laptop and anything happens to it, anyone gains access, you're just asking for trouble. 30 seconds?
Go ahead.
Last point, back up, back up, back up, and make sure when you're dealing with cloud companies, you read the terms of service, and that if the company goes belly under, you're still going to be able to get your data. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Bill, all great points. My name is Marcus Rauschiger. I'm with the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. And I was asked to come here today to talk a little bit about the legal landscape related to cybersecurity. Our center, the Center for Health and Homeland Security, we're a nonprofit consulting group. We provide a lot of advice to clients who are government clients or private sector clients on how to deal with emergencies, crises, as well as cybersecurity. And we come at cybersecurity from a law and policy perspective. So we don't provide advice on the technical side of things, but we help clients kind of navigate the legal landscape, talk to them about policies and other best practices that they should be considering. And you know, we started this work over 5 years ago when we realized that cybersecurity is not just a technical issue. A lot of folks, you know, hear the word cybersecurity and they say, I don't understand technology, I can't deal with this, you know, it's somebody else's problem. It's the IT folks at our, you know, business that have to deal with this. I don't have a role to play here. But it's become very clear that cybersecurity is not just for the IT people. It is for everyone within an organization to be aware of and to play a part in. And you might have heard the expression that cybersecurity is now a C-suite problem, meaning that the CEOs and the CFOs, the CEOs, they all have to care about this issue because there are so many legal and policy and strategy, strategic planning problems associated with cybersecurity. So these are the kinds of things that we help our clients with. Real quick, just to give you an idea about what some of those legal and policy issues are that companies and the government should be concerned about. There can certainly be legal requirements on you based on cybersecurity. You might not know, but almost every state in the nation has their own data breach laws, meaning that if your company is breached, if it is hacked and your customer data is released, you have a legal obligation to notify your customers that this has happened. And given that every state pretty much has their own law on this, it means that if you're a business that has customers in multiple states, you're responsible for complying with each one of those state laws, which of course can be very burdensome, especially for small businesses, and it can be very costly sending out all those notifications and making sure that you're actually in compliance with each of those state laws. So there's a very hard line legal requirement that's on you right from the get-go, and it has nothing to do with technology. You know, there are other things out there that might not be legal requirements per se. You might have heard of something called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Our friends here at the National Institute of Standards and Technology right here in Maryland are leaders in developing this framework. It's a collection of standards and best practices that exist that can help companies and organizations do a better job with their cybersecurity program. This framework is voluntary. It's officially voluntary. No one has to use it. But you're seeing more and more companies looking at it and saying, we are actually going to use this. And you're seeing this groundswell of companies and organizations implementing this framework, even though it's voluntary, because, I would argue, a lot of organizations are actually afraid that they might get sued if they're not implementing this framework. It's become a standard of care, so to speak. So another legal consideration that companies of any size have to consider. In addition to legal requirements, you might have regulatory requirements depending on the industry you're in. If you're in the healthcare sector, you've heard of HIPAA. If you're in the financial sector, you've heard of there are other regulatory requirements that you are subject to. And even if you're a run-of-the-mill business, we've seen the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, engage in some enforcement actions against businesses who the FTC deems as having not done enough to protect customer data. So there's that risk out there too. And finally, there might be contractual requirements on you. As a business, likely you have entered into contracts with suppliers or other vendors, and you maybe feel really good about what you're doing yourself in terms of cybersecurity, but if your vendor or the person you're contracting with is not doing what they should be doing for cybersecurity, then you're at risk too. And similarly, if you're supplying somebody with your product or your service, they might have put into their contract with you a requirement that you implement certain cybersecurity measures. So there could be contractual obligations placed on you as well.
It's fun.
I'll wrap it up there. Thank you. No, that's pretty much it.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Mark Moragley. I'm with the Maryland Department of Commerce. And Commerce has a fairly active cyber program. I spend the bulk of my time trying to interface with companies around the state to understand the skill sets and hopefully fill in with incentives and other things that Commerce can provide. And so I've been asked to moderate this, and we've discussed some ideas for questions that might be useful. But I would open it up. If anyone hears something, piques their interest, jump right in. We'll make it an interactive discussion. Does anybody have, this is a little bit dated, does anybody have an idea of how much Marylanders lost to cybercrime in 2016? Any guess? The FBI tracks incident reports. These are just reported incidents. For 2016, it was $22 million in just the state alone. And you can imagine, given ransomware and all the other things that have become more active this past year, it's a really big problem. And this is spread out across all age groups and many, many different kinds of businesses. So it's something you need to be concerned about. And so our task today is try and give you some ideas to take back with you to your companies. So let's start with introductions, and if I could, I'll say your name, if you could just tell everybody who you are and what you do, and then we have a couple of questions. So Olin, why don't you start?
Yeah, absolutely. Olin Green, I'm with Barbecue Corporation. I'm our VP of Cyber Programs. Barbecue, we are a federal contractor primarily.
Speak up.
Speak up. Barbecue, we are a federal contractor primarily. We have about 30 contracts across Department of Defense, DHS, Department of Treasury, Department of Justice, and others in the industry. As a company, our core competencies are cyber, software development, and IT and cloud infrastructure.
Thank you. Ira?
Ira Kohlmeister, Network Alarm Corporation. Hey, Joe. We actually are a Montgomery County software developing group, and just a short story, a few years ago we had a client that got hacked, and we thought, oh, not a problem, we'll go out and find some software that'll be able to keep us apprised if anybody crawls into their network. After months of looking, we found, just like the Three Bears, some things were too expensive, either too difficult to work with, or they were free and they didn't work at all. So after a great deal of frustration, Dave basically said, you know what, we can write it, let's go ahead and write it ourselves. So we wrote what we consider to be the state-of-the-art intrusion detection software. We made it into a service so it can fit any model business. So if you're a small organization that uses outsourced IT, we can work with the outsourced IT, we don't replace anybody. And if you're a large organization, we can compartmentalize the way we manage the security so that you have complete control over who sees what. And if anybody crawls into your network at 2 o'clock in the morning, about 60 seconds later, you get a text message saying that somebody just logged in. And that's pretty much what we do.
Thanks. Bhavesh.
Sure. I'm Bhavesh Vadani. I'm a partner with Cohn Resnick. We are the 10th largest consulting and CPA firm in the nation. I am their technology risk and cybersecurity compliance leader nationally. My background is predominantly information security. We help clients of all sizes within Cohn Resnick, small, medium, large, and global. Our primary focus is to help clients understand what are their risks, not just from a cybersecurity standpoint, but their technology landscape standpoint. Oftentimes, with the words like cybersecurity, people forget or you lose sight of the fact that there are standalone systems that you all have in your organizations that may not be connected, and hence they're equally susceptible to risks. So what we try to do is we try to help organizations build a strategy that looks at technology risk holistically, and it's not just thinking about cybersecurity as a silo. And I'm hoping to share some of those points today with you all to see how you can implement in-house for some of your organizations to make you more secure.
Great, thank you. So we're going to start off with a really basic question, and then as the conversation rolls forward, I'll try and make it a little more complex. But the first question I'd like everybody to comment on is, what kind of hacks should a small business be concerned about right now? What are the obvious things that come to mind? Ira, with Network Alarm, you're listening?
Yeah, it's, you know, the interesting thing is there would have been a time where I would have said there would be a radically different set of threats. But the reality is we're starting to see that the smaller and smaller organization, just as Marcus was talking about the supply chain, that some of the most major hacks that we've seen, for instance, like Home Depot. Home Depot was hacked by going into their heating and air conditioning subcontractor. Because the subcontractor, of course, everything's computerized, so they have to maintain access to Home Depot's network. So they had everything, and it was poorly protected. Why? Because a heating and air conditioning company traditionally would say, what do we have? You know, we don't have anything. But true to what Marcus was talking about, you're part of a network of systems and suppliers. So what I would say, whatever organization you are, you need to be able to take it as if you were a major corporation and start out with a good assessment. You get an organization, both these organizations provide assessment. Everybody on the panel can provide that. You want to be able to assess where you are, and then take a look at everything one by one to make sure that you're not overlooking any of the threats. But I think one of the most compelling stories is, if you're asking the question, seek advice of an IT organization that can provide you a good assessment of where you are.
Any other comments on?
Yeah, so I'll add a comment, and I'll add one that happened to me personally yesterday. So I'm on a board in my county of an organization, and I'm the treasurer of that board. So I write the checks there. So I've received an email from our board president, or at least I thought it was from our board president. So his name, it came through as usual, and it addressed me as Olin Green, comma, please send me a check for X amount of dollars. I need you to send it to this address by the end of the day. What that phishing is, what you call that. Exercise didn't understand that I'm a cyber aware person there, so immediately like the antenna went up. First, our president, he doesn't address me as Olin Green, coach or other things there. The other is we never make those requests via email. So there's some controls in place. So I guess my comment is to just be aware. The weakest link in any cyber or any threat, obviously, is generally the people. And having people who are adequately equipped via training, this awareness, knowledge of little things to look for is very important, a very important part of the problem.
Are there any prevalent hacks that are more likely to occur in small business? You guys should look at that at all?
Phishing, as Olin said, is the most prevalent, but I would also say ransomware is another one, and primarily because the malicious intruders, hacktivists, there are different kinds, right? Or just a script kiddie. I call it a script kiddie, as somebody who's trying to impress his or her girlfriend, boyfriend, trying to say, I'm technically savvy and I can do this, hey, listen what I did. All they're trying to do is they're trying to get access to your environment, right? So they will figure out a way how to do it. They have tools available, freely available, I should say, and readily available to launch an attack, whether it's a phishing attack, whether it is ransomware, whether it is trying to figure out how can I mimic an email address of somebody and see if I can do a brute force attack, right? Small organizations, they know, don't have the resources adequately applied in these cases, and hence small organizations or mid-sized organizations are the prime target. To Ira's point, why should you care? You should care because not necessarily that sometimes they'll just come and exfiltrate data or information or disrupt your operations, but they can use your network as a launchpad for further attacks, which even if you don't like the fact that you're involved in it, you are now legally liable and involved because the network attack came from your network. So you have to be extremely careful about those things as well. It's not about what you have. What can your network be used as moving forward for other attacks, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind.
I have actually a follow-up for my fellow panelists. As a small practitioner, a lot of my data is in the cloud. My practice management system is in the cloud. My QuickBooks is in the cloud. I have some case tracking systems in the cloud, and my sense, at least, and I'd like to have some comment on this, is that actually, despite all of the publicity we hear about hacks in the cloud, that probably most of the time I'm getting better security and better backup on the big cloud systems than I am on my little personal computer system, and that in many cases, the weakest link might be your own in-house system. I mean, maybe you're always keeping it patched, maybe you have the latest technology, maybe you have the best antivirus, maybe you have a state-of-the-art firewall, maybe you have an intrusion detection system, but most people on my scale don't have that stuff. Sometimes they don't even have adequate backup. So I guess I'd like a reaction to that question, cloud or personal or...
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, remember with the cloud, the cloud organizations have intense cyber threat analysis going on 24/7. They have entire staffs that you could never afford to manage this. They work preemptively. They look at every possible problem. And yes, you're probably a lot as far as a threat level, you're probably okay in the cloud. But what you point out, I've seen this, I think we've all seen this, that weakest link is yourself. Because whatever you do, you don't have the infrastructure. You may not have an intrusion detection software to see somebody's logged in. If you don't know that anybody's logged into your system, and as Bhavesh said, they've launched an attack from your system. So if they plant a piece of software to monitor your passwords, they could get your passwords for your cloud, even though the cloud's secure with the keys, you can walk in the front door. But you're absolutely right. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the weakest link in that case is yourself, making sure that you have that little desktop is well protected, patch levels, good antivirus, intrusion detection, firewall up to snuff, and as we all understand, the weakest link of the link is a human. You know, as far as that, because we've all gotten those emails where it says, please do something, and you go, that's not the way they address me. So yeah, I would definitely agree that the cloud is safe.
Just to add to that, cloud, right? They're in the business of providing that service. So they have, in order for anybody to use an AWS, a Microsoft, or even mid-tier cloud providers, if they don't provide the right security measures, there is no reason for you to use them. There's no reason for you to subscribe with them. When you're in a business of providing that service, you have to make sure that you're providing adequate security and measures, because that's when an organization, small, medium, large, are going to trust you with the data or trust you with the resources. So to your point, Bill, yes, you're more secure by going to these cloud service providers because they have more resources to use and to provide that same level of measure that you would have to do on your scale.
Olin, maybe to follow up with you for a second, I know that Veracube focuses a lot on H800, 171, which is a set of standards. How do you see that fitting in with a small business? Is there a way to apply it or use sophisticated things like that in a smaller scope?
Yeah, so I would say absolutely. So the NIST is the NIST guidance, the NIST publication, and often those things are hundreds of pages of information, overwhelming to even folk who are information security professionals. But the takeaway from a NIST publication like the 171 is that you have to do something, and you have to put at the foundation of anything to become cyber secure, to feel better about your security posture, you need to put together a plan of how you're going to do certain things. So the 871 and other documentation or standards out there really gives you an opportunity to reflect on how you're handling your own data, in addition to how you would be potentially handling data of potential customers or current customers that you had. So a lot of the things that we do internal to RQ, not external, is we do things like rights management, because for a corporation, your data, your information is, from a defense perspective, that is your classified information. That is what differentiates us and you from any of your competitors out there, and you have to do things to protect that and ensure that is not available and exposed. So my advice would be, obviously, and I think it's been said already, but come up with a plan. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out plan. You know, plans are dynamic in nature, so another thing that I would say is be agile, to throw out a buzzword from a development perspective here in your planning, because the threat evolves every day. Well, we learn something. Well, I learn many things new every day about something in the world. So just plan, use common sense, and just know a takeaway that we've done with the 171 is that, you know, our data is our classified data, and we treat it as such, and put those measures in place so that you are protected and that your competition and others aren't utilizing your information.
Bhavesh, I want to follow up though. Your company focuses a lot on assessments and that sort of thing. I'm still a little confused as to how a smaller business is really going to wrap their hands around this, because it's obviously more than just paperwork. There's a level of understanding involved. How would you scale this to a smaller company?
So oftentimes when we talk to clients, right, any size organization, the first question is, we want to do an assessment. So I always tell, what is the driver of the assessment, right? The idea I like to engage my clients in is a thought-through business discussion, because cybersecurity or technology risk in today's day and age where we are connected systems utilizing to provide a business or a service, you have to look at it holistically. What is the business goal? What are the business drivers? And what is driving the need for doing an assessment? Based on that, what we do is we take, if it's a contractual compliance requirement, if it is a industry regulation requirement, we take those drivers and we say, okay, what's the best out of this that can be applicable to you? Because not every requirement in there is applicable to a small, medium-sized business. NIST 800-171 is a classic example. That basically is a subset of nothing what we used to call NIST 800-53. Now it's a subset of 110 controls or 110 measures in there. But of those 110 measures, you can actually go line by line of all of those and say, oh, this may not apply to me because I'm not in that business, or my service does not really lend itself to have this kind of a measuring, right? So the idea is to simplify the requirement. Once you simplify the requirement, then you can see that the assessment becomes a lot more simpler, not that overwhelming, and it makes a lot more sense because it directly ties to your business goal. What is the driver of that? When we do a high-level assessment or a comprehensive assessment, sometimes I feel we lose the business driver, the business goal, and what is it that applies to our environment. And that's the educational process that I tell clients we need to do. That would be the stepping stone in planning.
I want to go off the cycle here one bit. Marcus has developed a document called A Model for Cybersecurity for Small Business. And it's rooted in regulations, but it's translated as simple 10 or 12 rules that every company can follow. Maybe you want to speak for a minute about that? And
sure.
We should make it available because it's an excellent document.
I think a lot of times the question is, for small businesses, well, what can we do? The problem seems overwhelming. We hear about cyber issues every day. We hear a lot of technological terms thrown at us. And I think, for larger businesses, they have resources to handle this and they feel comfortable handling these issues. Smaller businesses are asking, well, what can we do? We have limited resources. We don't have technical expertise. So I think a lot of the things that have been said here already are something that small businesses definitely should take into account, like using a cloud service provider, or all of the good cyber hygiene practices that Bill mentioned in the beginning. But then, there are certain basic planning and policy steps a small business can take that aren't very complicated, but that do address a lot of those fundamental concerns associated with cybersecurity. So, the Federal Trade Commission, for example, I mentioned earlier, yes, they've enacted and they've engaged in certain regulatory enforcement actions against businesses, including small businesses, but they've also put out some guidance for businesses in terms of what they should be doing. And this is kind of what we use to develop our own guidance at the Center for Health and Homeland Security in terms of what our clients can do. These are very basic, straightforward, step-by-step tasks that can be undertaken by anyone, even when you don't have a lot of resources.
We should make sure that everyone gets a copy of it. It's really useful. Ira, I want to come back to you. Given I have a small business, I know something's going on. What are the right first steps to figure out what might be going on? If I'm indeed, we have to assume everybody has been intruded. What should I do to flag it?
Well,
right first step.
It's like, you don't want to wait until you get sick, really. You want to vaccinate today. And what we talk to our clients about is, and everybody on this panel is singing from the same song, it's you want to think proactively. You want to think about what you have to protect, and you have to put in place certain components to make sure that the integrity of your data is maintained. A lot of people are moving to encryption. You want to make sure that at the very least you have your antivirus up and running. The other element is you want to make sure your firewall is working. If you don't have a firewall, today I think everybody has some level of a firewall. And for us, we say intrusion detection, because we know on a first-hand basis that people can get into networks and never be found until they do something wrong. But they can stay in there for weeks, if not months, doing illicit operations. So we say you need intrusion detection, you need a good firewall, you need antivirus, and the element is you need a good education. It ends up being that human aspect. You've got to know, great example, Olin talks about getting an email that just doesn't look right. You have to maintain your being a skeptic. You've got to look at things skeptically and follow through with that. If you think something is going on and you're at that level, I would say the first thing you need to do is call a professional. Because if you're there, you're not going to get out of the rut yourself. That's for sure. You've got to be able to mitigate it as soon as possible. There was one element, there was a chart that Kaspersky put together that said for small businesses, if the mitigation takes place within a day or so, the cost is on average $27,000. If it goes 1 week, it grows to $107,000. So you can see a small business, if it goes even further, and with the costs of, as Bhavesh was saying, you have to contact all your people, and you end up getting to the point where there's some stories about small businesses actually going out of business because the expenses are so large. So to get back to your original question, is if you think that you have gotten, you're already into that point, at this point you need to call a professional to be able to come in and help you.
So there's no magic software I can install to figure out what's going on in my car.
It's past that time.
No, I mean, just to add to that, there's no magic software that's going to tell you what your next steps are going to be. You know, the magic software, intrusion detection or threat hunting or any of the other advanced software, even with large companies, it's not going to prevent all the attacks coming to them, right? I mean, just think about it. That's why in the industry today, the lingo is there is never absolute assurance or absolute security. There is reasonable security and reasonable assurance, right? That's why even when you are talking to, if you get legally arbitrated for something that, okay, your data got breached and somebody is going to sue you, the court is going to look at it and say, okay, what reasonable steps did you take? The court is never going to say, what absolute steps did you take, right, to protect security? Because there is nothing as absolute security in today's day and age. So Magic 1, there is no software that's going to prevent you 100%. But what happens from a reasonable standpoint, as Ira said, is you have to have a plan. You have to make sure that you know what your next steps are going to be in the event you identify a breach or you identify a malicious activity or an unusual activity within your network or your system. And that plan is what we call the incident response plan, which allows you to then communicate with law enforcement, communicate with professionals, call your legal counsel or your legal help, whoever they may be, so that you can then start figuring out what is the recourse. Because the damage is already done. What you want to do is you want to limit the damage further, right?
And Mark, if I may, just 10 seconds. So, as I say in the industry, that there's two types of people or companies. There's those who have been hacked, and then those who don't know that they've been hacked. So what I often say is I'll go back to what I always say is common sense. So, you know, you're not going to leave your car out here on Fleet Street with the keys in it and it's running and the door's open, unless you're trying to set a trap here. But it's like just use good common sense. And one thing about today's world, we all have smart devices of some sort, tablets, phones. We've all downloaded apps, and the app will ask for permission to your contacts, your camera, pretty much full access to your device. And my response is generally, why do you need access to my, all my information for me to play a little sports game there? So I mean, there's little things like that, and I'm not saying don't download apps. I'm not saying to download apps either, but I'm saying just use a little common sense when you're looking at how you utilize technology.
I continue the thought. Are there other common sense things that come to mind for everyone that would be worthwhile?
Sure. I mean, if you don't have your IT outsourced, right? If let's say you have IT in-house, a desktop or a server or something, I mean, I tell people not to boil the ocean. You don't need to boil the ocean. You start with making sure you have the right version of software, right? Don't use unsupported versions of software. I mean, that's like you're inviting trouble right there because it's not supported, hence it's not going to get patched, right? And vulnerabilities are always identified in those. Make sure you are patching once the patches come out, and patch it with a discipline, not just, okay, ad hoc process, it doesn't work. Make sure you have adequate passwords. Training, as Olin and Ira mentioned, we are the weakest link. Whether we like it or not, humans are the weakest link. That's why, if you think about it, in today's day and age, all the attacks that happen, Nobody's going to come out in forensic analysis afterwards, and the reports will not say, oh, they were able to penetrate this advanced firewall or an IDS, IPS, or any other mechanism and get in, right? The penetration was somebody clicked on a link which opened the door for the intruders to have full access. Somebody clicking on the link was a human, right?
Or it might be an employee too.
Well, employee.
Or an employee.
Right? So the point is, training people and providing the cultural awareness and increasing the cultural awareness, I think, will go a long way.
Bhavesh, isn't that how the DNC got hacked, that John Podesta got phished?
Yeah. The phishing, not just DNC, I mean, it's if you look at, going back to the history of major events that have happened, security incidents that have happened, and if you follow them through, the common link there is somebody allowed intruders access in their environment, knowingly or unknowingly, right? So there's a criminal aspect of it, and then there is the unintentional aspect of, oops, I clicked on a link, or oops, I followed through and gave my credentials. Sometimes it's not clicking on the link. Sometimes you get emails saying, I work for your outsourced IT department. I need to run some services on your laptop, desktop, or server. Please provide me credentials. One thing to keep in mind, if your IT service provider is asking you to provide credentials via email, you really need to have a different conversation with them, because no IT service provider should do that.
Two very quick comments, again, from the perspective of the little guy who's very cost conscious. And that one is that, you know, I take compliance with the rules of professional conduct very seriously. My license depends on it. But the standard the bar sets, again, is one of reasonableness. And so it's a journey for me. And rather than being paralyzed by trying to boil the ocean, I try incrementally to learn and to take what steps I can and to keep up. The other thing I've done is I've added a cybersecurity policy to my professional liability insurance, because I recognize you know, the point that sooner or later you're going to get attacked, and so at least I'm hoping I don't get hit with that $27,000 in the, or more, if in the, you know, fortunate event somehow I get whacked.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up one element. We're all talking about the human aspect, and phishing is probably one of the most prevalent ways to be able to get passwords. The brochure, the little brochure that we put out, that little trifold, there's a little something that we do with our clients to mitigate some of, reduce the chance of getting phished. And what we recommend to all our clients is maintain a number of email accounts or aliases, so you don't need separate accounts. There's instructions in there how on like Gmail you can actually have an unlimited, so that all of your important organizations you do business with has a slightly different email address for you. If it's an alias, it comes into your inbox, you don't have to do anything different. But if you get a phishing attempt, which everyone gets, that says your Citibank account has been hacked, if you have a slightly different email address that they have for you, it doesn't take but 15 seconds to look at the to address in the email that does not contain that special email address that only Citibank has. So you can then just delete that at that point. So we strongly recommend maintaining, Gmail has an unlimited number of aliases. For some reason, Microsoft has got 10 annually, and Yahoo, the chief of getting breached, allows you to have one. So I would suggest if you have Yahoo, move on. But there's some suggestions in there about improving your chances against being phished.
We have two more questions I want to ask before we close. So the first one is, we've talked a lot about technologies and some basic steps. What's the scale of having to do planning? Is it a small project? Is it a large project? I worry sometimes that we frighten small businesses away from actually doing anything because it looks so complex. Any thoughts?
Yes, I guess the thought, and I'll go back to something I said before, is the plan doesn't have to, it shouldn't be cumbersome in today's age, you know, and agile. Again, I'll throw that word out. It has to be agile, it's an evolving process there. So planning should start with, so bigger organizations have more resources to do planning, and there's more layers and things there. Smaller organizations, and I'll speak to me and my 130-person cyber organization. I don't have a team that does planning. So what we generally do is we identify from a cyber perspective things that, or from any perspective rather, things that are important to us, and that could be information, that can be people, that can be technologies, and then we identify what our strategy will be for each of those things. And in a cyber perspective, it's knowing, and you can use all the guidance that we mentioned before, the NIST and things of that nature, and all the controls that they've laid out and the objectives. But there's an element of all of this doesn't apply to me in the way I have my enterprise set up or my small organization set up. So you want to identify those elements that are relevant and have a plan for that. You don't have to plan for it all up front. Identify the elements of those things that you identify, the elements of the things that you identified that are most important, that are most vulnerable, that are most critical to your success as a company, and start there. And over time, you can always evolve your plan. But I would say keep it small to start, because if you boil the ocean, you're probably never going to be done, and your plan will not be effective because you're going to miss something. When you start small, you're probably still going to miss something, but at least you can. It's dynamic. You can go back in and you can update it, you can evolve it, you can improve it as time goes on, and as you learn more about the threats that you have in your organization, or potential threats and vulnerabilities.
Marcus, did you?
Yeah, I think those are all excellent points. And I'll just add that we do a lot of planning for our clients too, and plans are great, but then at some point you have to train and exercise on those plans as well, right? If you write the best plan in the world and you put it on the shelf, it's no good. You got to make sure that everyone in your organization understands what the plan is, are trained on the plan, and then have regular exercises. Have it a half a day where you get together around a table like this and kind of talk through a potential scenario and see how everyone within your organization reacts. So I think training and exercise is another big piece to all this.
I laugh when Olin says he's a small organization. There's an organization of one, but I think that something like being here is a first step, and I really try to do as much self-education as I can, because that's what I have the resources to do.
One of the things I tell clients is, over time, once you educate and be aware of different things, you want to get to a point, and you may start that way, is your planning doesn't have to be a separate planning session. I mean, all of you are in business, right? You all have business strategic discussions, right? We need to start thinking about cybersecurity or the risk associated with losing information or system as a business issue. The day we all as organizations start thinking about it as a business issue, you won't need a separate planning session for this, trust me. You'll be talking about it as if you are coming up with a business strategy, as if, how am I going to service this client, and I want to make sure that I'm not going to lose their data, right? Or somebody's not going to be able to access that data or that system that I'm going to use to service the client. It will become part of your culture, right? As executives in here, that's what I would encourage everybody to do. Don't consider cyber as a separate issue. Think about cyber as a business issue. Because at the end of the day, as Ira mentioned and as Bill mentioned, there are organizations who've gone out of business because they were not able to defend themselves towards attacks or reasonably show what they had done. So if you think about this as a business issue, you will start seeing that the planning in itself is done. You're thinking about the risk associated with that as part of your business strategy discussion.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing, and I already probably have to. So I would also say, if you're going through the process now of figuring out how to plan or what to plan for, your best resource often is talking with your peers in other organizations, because a lot of the things that you're thinking about, that you're concerned about, things that you haven't thought about, your peers or potentially have gone through it, or they're in the same place. So that's an excellent resource as well. Is just to trust your network, trust your peers, and leverage it.
And I think that there's really nothing I can add to this except you have a panel of people up here that do this for a living. We invite you all. Anybody has a question, don't hesitate. Our contact information is on the brochure. Just give us a ring. We're more than happy to answer any questions whatsoever, small or large. But the journey begins with a step. So that's what I would suggest.
One last question. Something happens. I get a ransomware attack. I know I got hacked. What's the first thing I need to do as a business? Any recommendations?
Unplug from the net.
Unplug from the net. That's a good one. What else? Anything?
Well, hopefully, the one thing I would say is, especially in this realm of ransomware, it's just exactly what Bill was talking about, backup, and keep separate copies. One of the elements that in fact, we're working with a client just yesterday about this. If you have backup that is on the net, that is like, like you go to a C drive or your S drive, which is your shared drive on the net, and that's where you're backing it up, many ransomware applications will find it and encrypt the backup. So you have to have a technique that removes it from the network, and you have to have multiple copies over a period of time, because you don't want to find that you've just been backing up encrypted material. So one of the strong elements you need to think about is, especially in the realm of ransomware, is you need to backup, and that backup has got to be disconnected from the network. It cannot be a network share, or you're going to lose it.
So Ira, what kind of basic technology for us little guys would you suggest to implement that?
The backup?
The backup in terms of rotating backups offline.
Well, there are a number of tools, like Carbonite and the rest of those are great to get started. What we did with a client yesterday was we put in a small network attached storage device that is backed up using a protocol called FTP. And it's a very primitive protocol, but ransomware doesn't know your username and password to be able to log into the FTP server at night and do backups. So it's a very easy way of doing it, and you're talking about something that you can get away with probably less than $500 for the NAS drive.
Yeah, and I would actually add to it, you have cloud solutions providers right now for small size companies. Who will provide you the backup solution and offsite back?
Right.
Will basically take it as an offsite storage for $10, $12 a month, depending on the size of the data. I mean, that's, to me, going back to the question, why would I use cloud service providers, is because economies of scale, right, can be obtained. Again, they're addressing so many different client needs. You will be one of their clients, so you can definitely take advantage of that, right? So think about those things. I tell clients, be creative. Sometimes it's not about what you own and how you acquire it. Sometimes, how do you transfer the risk, right? The key here is to think about, okay, I have a risk. How am I going to either share the risk or transfer the risk, right? So that my burden is reduced on my end. Right? Sometimes you have to be creative in thinking about that as well.
So we've got a couple now. It's backup, antivirus, strong passwords. We didn't really talk much about that, Bill, but you mentioned that. Passwords are very important. Software, keep it up to date. Did I miss anything?
Intrusion detection.
Intrusion detection.
And training.
And training. And training.
And training. And there are a lot of
And insurance.
I would also add on the password, is that in your policy, you should have a policy that talks about not only making a complex password, but also changing your password. Because it's one thing to have a password and you have it for 20 years. If that password over time, it becomes less effective. The other thing on patching, and I don't know what the understanding level is, how to say it, patching is just the update. So if you have an antivirus, it's ensure that you do the updates regularly, because like an Apple bomb, and I'm not sure if that came up before I got here, or Apple text bomb, I believe is what it's called. Apple was working through the patches and things. Now, simple, do the update when they have it. If you have that type of device, then you're probably covered. But oftentimes, we don't do the updates. I've been guilty in the past of ignoring it, or remind me later, because I don't want to, slow down the performance of my asset at the time. But it's critical it's a critical first step, I should say, in showing that your technology is working for you.
One educational resource for those of us who have it is professional associations. For example, I am a member of a number of voluntary bar associations. If you are a member of a professional association and they do any kind of education, encourage them to bring in experts and have a seminar on cybersecurity or best computer practices. I mean, my bar associations do it regularly now.
And the other thing, just to add to that, actually our federal government has plenty of resources, and groups that small and mid-sized businesses can actually join, right? So you will get daily alerts. For example, FBI has something called as a Cywatch. On a daily basis, you can get alerts of what's going on out there and how it impacts organizations, small, medium, large, right? So you can then be educated enough to know, oh, you know what? Yeah, we had a network performance issue, or my IT guy was complaining about something, or my finance person was complaining about something, or I found some issues in the performance. Now you have some basis to think about it and say, oh, you know what? Let me do a little bit more research on it. So the more education and the alerts and the information you get that are relevant to you, the more informed decisions you'll be able to make.
The Department of Homeland Security has a very thorough website
Yep.
in this area, so it's worth looking at. Any questions from the audience before we close it up? Go ahead.
I was wondering if you have any advice for transferring confidential documents. Is it better to send them, say, via Dropbox than via your email account?
If you send it via email, make sure your email is encrypted. So depending on which email service you're using, you potentially may have to pay extra to get the encryption mechanism in it. If that's too expensive, there are plenty of tools available out there that can be integrated with your email that allows you to send either a mechanism where Bill mentioned that an email goes out and you upload that information onto some kind of a portal, an email goes to your client, they go and they download it down, right? So there are multiple secure ways to do it. The decision is how it fits your resource allocation and how it fits your needs. But encryption is key. There are other mechanisms and tools available.
And their services, DocuSign
Yep.
is a great example of one that you subscribe to, and I think they allow some amount of free exchanges, but then you pay for the service.
One mistake that lawyers make all the time, believe it or not, is they'll transfer files on a thumb drive or on a DVD, which in some ways is pretty secure, it's not on the internet, except they won't encrypt the files on the thumb drive or the DVD, so if that gets lost or stolen, it's all right there for anybody to read. So remember that encryption is not just for email, it's for hard drives on computers, it's for phones, and if you're sharing DVDs or thumb drives, get a simple encryption program, make sure those encrypted too.
And with the encryption programs, not to belabor the point there, but ensure that you're assigning a fairly complex password with that as well. I mean, that's just a really simple tidbit, but often, you will use something that's common and it's easily crackable.
Password 123 is not good.
That's not good. Password with, an A.
Anyone with a password is not good.
We have another question.
Is there a big difference between banks? Is it better to deal with a smaller community bank or larger bank when it comes to
security? We heard
security?
M&T is just
I
fantastic.
just heard.
That's an excellent question. I guess it probably depends. So all organizations, so just because you're a larger organization doesn't mean that you're more secure or less secure, and the same with small organizations. So it probably depends. So some of our major banks, and I won't advertise any of their names here, I would suspect that they're more secure. I know some use and follow the NIST and FISMA, also more federal guidance and things of that nature. So they've been through fairly robust processes there to ensure that they accounted for and address security concerns. There's another standard out there, and I don't think it came up here today, is FedRAMP. So often applications that are dealing with, in particular the federal government, they have to go through what's called a FedRAMP process, and it's another instruction that has guidelines and things of that nature that they must follow in order to be compliant or to do business in that realm. I'm aware of quite a few of the large banks that have done it, and they utilize the cloud there in some capacity. So I would tend to say it probably depends, but I am aware of many of the large banks who have taken a lot of those measures to be more secure.
I'd say, though, that there are certainly exceptions even among big banks. A major bank that I used for many years limited its password to 8 characters and did not have two-factor authentication, which, in my view, was just putting up a big sign saying, hack me.
So that's actually a good point. 2 or even 3-factor authentication would be my signal whether I'm using an institution or not.
You know, as an M&T Bank employee, I can answer that a little bit from our perspective. So you view this issue as a huge issue. I mean, you know, what happened to Olin yesterday happens to our clients on a daily basis, where the controller or the CFO of a company gets an instruction from the president or the owner, you know, Joe, wire me $500,000 by the end of today. I need to make a payment on my Florida condo or something like that. So the behavioral aspect that these guys mentioned, I think, is huge. And also, you know, there are services that banks offer that are, you know, that are some of these things. For example, if your bank is asking you to send in your personal financial statements, your tax returns, your business statements, just email me those. That's a bit of a red flag, you know, that they should ask you to send it via their encrypted service, like these guys mentioned. You know, so talk about it with your relationship manager, because it is a concern for the bank also. There's a lot of money that's being lost in these types of transactions.
The other thing too, for encryption tools, you want to use either VeraCrypt or AxeCrypt. They're both free. They work really well. Do not use the Excel password or Microsoft Word password capability. They're all breakable. There are tools out there which can break those tools and get into your documents. So if you want to send something secure, send it through VeraCrypt or AxeCrypt and put a really long password on it. And then put it on Dropbox. But don't just transfer it to Dropbox without encrypting the words.
Could you comment on Adobe's encryption?
I don't know much about Adobe's encryption. I have a poor opinion of Adobe because their Flash program is one of the biggest virus plots on the internet and responsible for more hacks than probably any piece of software that's ever been in existence. And Adobe Reader is also a huge portal for being hacked. And I have a tendency to push people into Foxit Reader as a PDF reader because of the poor nature of Adobe software. So they make a great paint program. Their other stuff is not been really good.
Dave, could you spell those 2 encryption programs that you mentioned?
VeraCrypt is VeraCrypt. It's free. And the other one is AxeCrypt, AxCrypt. And I believe you can get them for both Windows and Mac. AxeCrypt came out of the old TrueCrypt, which was a great program for a long time, and they suddenly just shut down a long time ago. And folks took that source code. Yeah, actually, they just said, we're going out of business, nothing's secure. And so they did a giant audit on this thing, and AxeCrypt picked up their software, and they paid a lot of money for some companies to come in and look at the software at a very detailed level. And AxeCrypt, you know, paid to have any small changes made to that thing. And it apparently is bulletproof. So as long as you're using encryption that's 256 bits or larger, you'd have to have an event happen in the universe.
We have one last question.
Hi, so I work with healthcare practice owners who use virtual assistants. They use virtual assistants as contractors. They don't have control as such of their workstations. What suggestions would you have me give some of my clients about working with virtual assistants safely?
So do the virtual assistants have access to the practitioner's patient's data?
They run marketing campaigns, yes.
Do they, but as part of the marketing campaigns, do they have access to the actual PHI or patient
PHI
data?
is email and name, yes.
Okay. So what we've helped a group of medical offices as part of an assessment where we actually told them to, instead of having the virtual assistant use their asset, digital assets, a laptop or something, that the virtual assistant actually had to log into a portal or a server at the medical office or in the cloud, where they were not allowed to download any of the data onto their particular assets, but they could use the data from that particular server or the cloud, right? So that way they don't have access, they have access to read the data, but they don't have access to download the data, or then misuse the data, or compromise the data.
But these are virtual assistants. You said that you had them come into the physical
No,
location.
they wouldn't come into physical location. They're
Log in.
virtually
Log
accessing,
in.
they
Okay.
would log in, but the way they're
To the
logging
portal.
in,
Okay.
they're logging into the asset that is owned by the medical practitioner's office, and they're not using their own. So you could use dumb terminals, what we call in the industry dumb terminals, where me as a virtual assistant will use a dumb laptop or something that does not have the capabilities for me to be able to download anything on my hard drive, access my client's information, use my client's resources, and email from there or do any kind of a business transaction using my client's resources. Right? That's one way to do it.
Mark, before you close things up, I wanted to make sure that everybody knows that Kathy Silverstein from On the Mark Media is here. They're a PR firm right here in Rockville. And Joe Congerti from Tedco is here. And Tedco finances small technology startups and also kind of media. They start off with a small grant and then they will do matching grants after that. An outstanding service. It's great to have Joe here.
Thanks.
And there's a lot of other people, if I don't know all of you, but Rockville from Montgomery County Economic Development helped put this whole thing together along with Lori sitting next to him. And when people were asked to do anything, everybody, all of the panelists and all the people involved in the planning just stepped up to it. It was amazing, including Janet Terry, who works with Marcus. She just joined University of Maryland, and she is just a pistol when it comes to doing media. Great stuff. Thanks.
Well, I think we've exhausted the time. I hope this was useful and at least gave you a window into what's possible. There are a lot of resources. Be sure if you do get hacked, you definitely want to check in with the state's attorney's office in Maryland. They can help you. And there are a lot of online resources. So thanks for coming. And
one last thing, Mark. The bar is open at Pandora's, which is right down on Maryland Avenue. If you go around this parking lot that's in front of the movie theater, Maryland is